Town, looking at the issue of food in this country. It exposed a food crisis. Apparently that, according to news reports, constitutes a death sentence for many, and which the government has labelled as very, very serious indeed. Let's talk about that then. Because the issue is that even though this country produces sufficient food for its population, prices of food prevent the poor from getting adequate nutrition. We would like to know then what interventions are being considered in this regard. What is being done in order to ensure that this issue is dealt with? There was a report a day or so ago quoting the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries as saying last week that 12 million South Africans are food insecure. Now, that's a lot of people. 12 million South Africans are food insecure. Would like to get your thoughts then on this issue. Send us a text message this morning at 34701. But also, I would like to take your emails at gwala@sabc.co.za, gwala@sabc.co.za. 0891 104 208 is the number that we'll talk about a little bit later on, where you can just call me then, 0891 104 208. Let me introduce my guest on the program. I'll start in Cape Town in our Seapoint studios. We are joined there by Dr. Jane Battersby-Leonard from the University of Cape Town's African Centre for Cities. A very good morning to you, Dr. Jane Battersby-Leonard.
Good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Thanks indeed for your time. I'm also joined on the line by Dr. Sizwe Mkhize. He is the Deputy Director General, Food Security and Agrarian Reform. A very good morning to you, Dr. Mkhize.
Good morning to you, Kolani, and good morning to the listeners.
Thank you. Also, we are joined from Cape Town by Mohammed Kaji, Managing Director of the Food Bank South Africa. Mohammed Kaji, good morning.
Morning to you and to the listeners.
Thank you very much. Let's start with the study then conducted by the University of Cape Town, if we may, Dr. Battersby-Leonard. What was the study about and what were the findings?
Yeah, so the initial study was to look at the levels of food insecurity in our cities. We worked in 11 cities in southern Africa, just trying to understand what the challenges were, how many people were going without, what were some of the causes, what was the seasonality. So we found in these 11 cities an average of 77% of households were struggling to access sufficient food. In Cape Town, that was at 80%, Mzandusi up at 87%, and in Joburg at 43%.
Let me just pick up on Cape Town, because it would be quite... Cape Town is a relatively rich middle-class city. To have 80% of the people struggling to have access to food is quite dramatic.
No, in our study we focused on lower income areas of the city, so we didn't capture the experience in wealthy areas. But it does seem that the problem is significant. We know it's related to poverty, we know it's related to inequality, but we also think there's an element of geography and market structure in these things that drive the process.
So you say 77% of the people that were surveyed had problems accessing food, but what does that mean?
Yeah, so in our survey we used a tool called the Household Food Insecurity Access Scale, which basically asks a series of 8 questions, starting with, are you worried about going hungry, but all the way down to, are you reducing meal sizes, are you reducing meal numbers, are you absolutely going without? And so it's a scale that's been devised internationally and rolled out around the world. And so to give you an example, what severely food insecure means is that they've reduced meal size often, often running out of food, going to bed hungry, or going a whole day and night without eating.
And you found that 77% of the people then, go to bed without food?
Would have experienced that within the last month at least.
Is the problem getting worse, or has it always been like this?
It's difficult to say. There haven't been these longitudinal studies that have looked specifically at food insecurity. We think that the problem gets worse at these periods of high food price inflation, such as we had in 2008 and as we're currently experiencing.
Now, you say Cape Town 80%, Msunduzi and KwaZulu-Natal 87%, but what is the average, do you think, of all the cities that you surveyed? Do you get that it's hovering around that percentage?
Yeah, it seems to be hovering around that percentage. Again, we've only worked in 3 cities in South Africa. The other cities were in the rest of the region. But we would imagine that the problem across South Africa in our urban areas is the same.
All right, let me bring in Dr. Mkhize then. Dr. Mkhize, 77% of all households surveyed were either moderately or severely food insecure. What is the reaction?
I must say that I haven't seen that report. However, it is so true that about 20% of South Africans are vulnerable to food insecurity. And here I think we need to understand vulnerable. They can go hungry anytime, depending on the situation that arises. So much as the study has been done, but we are also equally aware that we have that challenge of food insecurity in the country.
What do you attribute it to? Is it because people don't have money, they're too poor to afford their food, or are the prices, as I mentioned at the beginning, going up?
It's two things. Food security is basically food availability and food and affordability to buy food. So you will come across situations where people just cannot afford food because of the food prices, particularly, as our colleague has said, the food price hikes in 2008 as well as late last year. And you also have a situation whereby there's just not food available to the people, and that is mainly the problem with people in isolated rural areas where people cannot produce their own food, and particularly for those people in informal settlements in big cities.
Now, Dr. Mkhize, you're talking about 20% of South Africans that may be food insecure. Is that number going up, or is it steady, or is it decreasing?
I think it has been steady for some time now, but of course, vulnerable means they can go hungry anytime. It doesn't mean that they are hungry now. They are just vulnerable to food insecurity.
And Mohammed Kachi, let me bring you in this discussion. Then, what are your experiences around the vulnerability of of poor South Africans?
Yes, I think when we look at the issue of vulnerability, in our opinion, we were always under the impression that people in the rural areas were a lot more vulnerable. But that's kind of negated by the study that Dr. Battersby has done, and showing that the issue is as critical in the urban centres.
And perhaps a point to discuss a little bit, if we may, Dr. Battersby, that you found that this is an urban problem as much as it is a rural problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Historically, we've always thought of it as being a rural problem, and I think we've always thought of the heart of poverty as being rural, but increasingly we're seeing urban poverty as being a challenge, and urban food insecurity following that. I'm not sure we can assume that the same causes are necessarily there in urban and rural areas. So there's been studies that have looked at vulnerability to food insecurity in rural and urban areas around the world, and have found that households may be wealthier in urban areas but are as vulnerable to food insecurity. So there's something also going on within the urban system that's making people vulnerable to food insecurity.
But again, you said that the methodology is an international methodology here. Are you able to compare us with other middle-income countries? Are we worse? Dr. Battersby?
Sorry, yes. Are we worse or not? Again, we need to understand the sampling strategy that different cases have done, so it's quite difficult to make these blanket comparisons. But from the work we've done, the South African case is comparable to, say, for example, Botswana, say, for example, Zambia.
And that includes the fact that there's more food insecurity prevalent in urban cities as opposed to rural areas.
Yeah.
So you see that in other countries such as Botswana and Zambia as well.
Yes.
My lines are open, by the way, 0891 104 208, 0891 104 208. And would like now to talk, Dr. Mkhize, about the interventions, the proposed interventions, in order to deal with this problem.
Government is doing a lot to try and address the situation. Various government departments are playing some role. We have programs that are already underway, and we also have ideas that are being developed to manage the situation and, if possible, eradicate food insecurity prevalence in the country. The social grants, for instance, is one of the well-known programs in the country to ensure that people do get money to be able to buy food. But we also have a number of programs at national